The frame that we're going to hold is I'm going to talk a tiny little bit about prevention of conflict, and then Jerry gets to do all the cleanup, all the what do you do if there is conflict. I think those are, yes, but please, Jerry.
Yeah, no, well, you say this again probably, but yes, this particular session is framed more on structural things to do rather than the sort of practicing listening. As you know, we'll mention that, but that's not the focus of this session.
Right. Exactly that, which means you get to hear less, much less from me than from Jerry. Okay. And Jerry, as usual, always welcome to interrupt me and add your pieces. So overall, where we want to go in a system like sociocracy is that we have shared power, and that we share that power with other people, and that this power from within or power with does not mean coercion of other people. So we're not using power against anybody, right? So there's a lot of implications of that. For example, that we assume that people do things for reasons, for example, their way of achieving the aim of the organization or to be safe for themselves and so on. So there's a lot to find out once we hear from people. There's also the other side, however. So the first side is we want to understand each other and not walk around in this judgmental way and say, oh, these people are just stupid, they just do things because they're mean or because they're stupid or something like that. But they do things for reasons, and more understanding and more information will enhance connection. Yet there's also the other side, and that's this one. The one who acts out is not the only dynamic. They are enabled by others, and that's the other piece of somebody does something, but we also do something in response, right? And for example, one big thing, and that's where sociocracy comes in, is not speaking out when somebody has some pattern of behavior that is disruptive for the circle means to enable them, right? So there's one thing that people do, but also how we respond. And both of them we have to look at the same time. As I think you all know, the way we look at it, and so I'm still in preventing conflict here. How we look at it in sociocracy is we try to enhance information and give everybody as much information about each other and about whatever we're dealing with as possible, assuming that the more people know about each other, the less reason there will be for conflict. Because if I knew 100% what Jerry is thinking, there wouldn't ever be a reason for us to argue, right? Like if we had, the more transparency we have, the better. And also just the more, that means we have to show up as everything and everyone we are, with all of our stories and all of our thoughts, because they're real in our heads anyway, so we might as well share them, and then everybody has full information. If we hold back information about ourselves, it's going to be harder for everybody to meet us where we are and to understand. So there are those things that we do, like, check-ins and having an agenda where we all agree to, this is how we spend our time, honest closing rounds, so meeting evaluation. Those are all places where we can share more about ourselves and about how we perceive other people, so we don't get into these unhealthy patterns of enabling other people, or that sorry, I got distracted by somebody not being able to get in. I'm sorry about that. So that we find my way back. So where those are the places where we can speak up if somebody has a hard behavior that is hard for us in the circle dynamic, or where we can say whatever was going on for us and it becomes a shared reality. Other places are just in general rounds, hearing more from people, circle feedback, so a pattern where everybody gives feedback to each other, and performance reviews. All of those are ways where we can basically surface information, some sense of the part of reality that we might not get to see, again, with the same idea of the more we surface, the better for everybody. That also, and now it goes more towards circle structure and institutional support and so on, that means that circles in a decentralized distributed system have to be good at communicating. Because, for example, let's say a circle changes a whole different set of policies and they have not communicated with the rest of the members of the organization, the most likely thing to happen is an outcry of, what? You're doing what? Okay. And we see that quite a bit. And it's typically that circles didn't do their homework of communicating, asking for feedback, and so on. But that means, in a way, that each circle has to become like this little communication center of its own, right? So if you're the membership circle, you're the communicator about membership. If you're the whatever common house circle, you're the communication hub for that. And circles have to really take that role very seriously, because nobody else is going to talk about your domain publicly. You have to do it, right? That comes with your domain, making sure communication happens. And you might all know that, but just as recap, somebody said misunderstandings or differences in the understanding of whose aim is what is one source of conflict. And I agree completely. We see that a lot. If this is a domain and this is a domain and there's overlap, it's just a matter of time till that leads to conflict. If we both think that we're in charge of, let's say, one particular piece of equipment, and I put it where I think it should go, and you put it where you think it should go, and we both think with best intentions that we take care of things, this might lead to conflict. Then, if there's a gap, same thing, right? So, if I think Jerry is in charge of cleanup and he thinks I'm in charge of cleanup, just a matter of time till somebody gets upset. So the goal is to get to that perfect fit. There are all those different tools that are all awesome, that fit well. Oops, why is it going away? Oh, interesting. I'll just leave it here. All those different tools that help show up better and communicate more clearly and understand ourselves better, understand what's happening around us, understanding what is the history of people for in certain areas. That's all compatible with sociocracy and useful. The more inner work you do, the better governance will work. So that's not the focus of today, but it's needed to be said just very quick here, that of course um, enhances your communication and your connection. So the way we say that, and we might actually even expand that at some point, is that we want every organization to also have a commitment about to learn more about the content of the work. So if you are on training circle, it's a good idea to become really good at training and understand how training works and so on. If you are on the circle that deals with the tractor, then it's a good idea to become an expert on the tractor, at least some people in the circle. So that's what we mean by the content of the work. The other one is communication, because communication is what ties everything together. I've already talked some about that. You have to become really good at that. And then just governance. How do you use your processes? How do you do all those things so that you understand the logistics of how you share power with each other? And here I pass on to Jerry.
So there's so we're looking just at all the various things that we can do that are not just the interpersonal level of things or intrapersonal. So one is that any organization can have some kind of conflict support, conflict mediation um, circle or team. We have one, for example, in our own co-housing community. It's called the Care and Counsel Circle. Um, they're standing circle. They give support to anyone who has issues. They react to people requesting their help. They don't necessarily go in and say you need help, but they respond. And there's a whole pamphlet, which let's see if that's here. Over there. Okay. Next slide. There is a whole pamphlet that they produced that everybody in the community has access to. Gives how you can respond, how you can access this particular group, and it has a list of offerings that people within our organization can offer. such as a clearness process or helping hands, which is when somebody breaks a leg or has, gets sick with COVID, then how people respond in delivering meals or whatever those kinds of things are. Mediations, nonviolent communication support, restorative circles, which I'll say more in a moment. Um, Byron Katie's the work. So there's multiple ways of supporting communication skills and supporting people to be heard, understood, hopefully resolve their issues with each other. I want to say a little bit about just restorative circles. Restorative circles is a particular process that's kind of an outgrowth of nonviolent communication. It got started by this man named Dominic Barter in the jails and favelas of Brazil. So places where damage is done and healing would be really nice. So it brings the parties together. Uh, Even stop using the words of the person who did the harm and the person who received the harm, but just talking about, what was the act, who authored the act, who received the act, who was impacted by that. Bring those people together and go through a listening process, speaking and listening process, until you arrive at, at some resolution, if you do. So that's a very particular process that you can all look into some more if you don't already know about it. So I'm just going to run through a number of different aspects of things. So here's another one. Knowing who your members are. It's very, very important to know who the members are in your circle, because that's where conflict may happen, when people who just drop into your team thinking that they are a member and they have consent rights. Not so. Membership in circles and sociocracy is defined. It may be open, you may be open to new members, but a new person says, I'd like to join, and you say, great, you're welcome. And you go through a consent process to do that. So you know who your members are, and you can always go to parent circle or helping circle to give you support in resolution of issues. Along with knowing who your members are, you also need to have the capacity to remove somebody from a circle. If your circle has a particular aim and you're trying to get something done, and you're spending months not getting it done because you're dealing with internal conflict, then it may be time to look at that and say, hey, we need to get our work done. Therefore, somebody can make the proposal to remove somebody from the circle. And this is a standard sociocracy proposal. You make the proposal, you have clarifying questions, that person X can participate. You have a quick reaction round, that person X can participate, and you have a consent round, person X can't object to their own removal. So that takes a bit of courage in some places, but it is a necessary process. I mean, if this was a for-pay organization, you fire people from time to time for cause. And if you're a voluntary organization, you need to be able to also remove people from your working groups in order to have them be effective, meet the aims. One, before you even get to removing somebody from a circle, you can have a system that you have in your agreements, the graduated series of consequences. So, first of all, you just go one to one, either as facilitator or as an interested party in your team, and you go to say, hey, you're not participating in this agreement. You're not really honoring it. You're behaving in this particular way that's affecting me. Can we talk about that? And so you do the one-on-one. The one-on-one doesn't get you there, then you do the 3 or 4-on-1. You kind of build it up some more. If that doesn't work, and the important part is letting them know the impact that they are having on others, so that they can take responsibility around that impact. The next level is have a more formal meeting with, again, a smaller group, but maybe coming up with an improvement plan, a development plan that will help that person, meet the criteria for the kind of behavior that you want to have in your circle. Um, Beyond that, there is the restorative circles, the other kinds of, reaching out for mediation, etc., to try to understand that. If none of that is working, the improvement plan is not working, you can put that person on probation with here's the guidelines by which you need to do in order to stay in good graces here. And if that doesn't work, then comes the removal of somebody from the circle. For anybody in co-housing, this is tough. For anybody in business, it's almost too often done. So a lot of, you mentioned among the issues that you mentioned in the sort of the sources of conflict was lack of clarity of policies. Lack of clarity is a generic cause trigger for conflicts. So having real clarity will reduce the conflicts, and the policies themselves can describe how conflicts will be handled. Generally speaking, there's kind of like three sets of documents that organizations typically have, whatever their incorporation, founding document is, like the Articles of Incorporation. Then there is some set of bylaws that say how people are elected to the board or how decisions are made. And then there's a policy manual, which has, or also is called rules and regulations, other names. We use names like governance agreements to describe everything that sociocracy, applies to how we run our organizations. And then there's another set of documents. In our context, we sometimes call them community agreements, all the policies that we have that affect our organization, and we tend to arrange those by circles, by their domains. So for example, here is the table of contents of the Sociocracy for All governance agreement that we're actually reviewing as we speak. So, the aims, the principles, the general framework of the circles, what it means to be a circle member, the criteria, commitments to that, decision making, the basis for objections, understanding that, um, and then there's a couple of other things that we'll get to, like the policy resolution circle. And here is Pioneer Valley Co-housing Community Agreements. This is just the other set that's not about governance, but you can just sort of see, this is only a subset of them just for you to be able to see them. Buildings and grounds, what are the policies around our houses and about design review for additions to our houses? What are our policies about parking and pets? These are traditional kind of core issues. Membership circle, how do house transfers happen? What are the rights and responsibilities of members and of associate members? What are we doing about our replacement reserves? What's our policy about that? What are any kind of legally oriented policies that we might have? PALS means plants, animal, land stewards. So that's basically the policies that affect how we use our land. What's the private and public uses that we have on our land? So it just gives you a sense of that's just a title, and then there's a set of policies that go with each one of these titles. Okay, so policies get made, and then you don't like them. What do you do then? Well, the standard kind of framework would be ordinary communication. You don't like what that circle did, you talk to somebody over there who said, hey, I see that you're working on that stuff and you're making policies that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with. I don't know if I like them. Can we talk? And you have the informal conversation. You may even visit that circle and say, I want you to listen to me, to some of my thoughts. Never getting confused about who makes the decisions. That circle makes the decisions. Okay, if you've done the communication and you want to go to the next level, then you can appeal. And appeals can happen, in a sense, horizontally. You within your own circle, you recognize that what that other circle is doing has some impact that you don't like. And so you might send a delegation to that other circle and say, hey, this is what's happening with this policy in regards to how we consider it. Can you listen to us? Can we see if we can work this out? So the circle that has the authority to make those decisions can confirm, amend, withdraw their decision, and you can detail what this policy looks like. There's always the possibility of mediation, and you can limit that so it's not an endless process. And if that stuff doesn't work, you can appeal vertically, which is the more, in a sense, more traditional way in sociocracy, that my circle, who has an objection to some other circle did, will go to our parent circle. So if I'm in community life and PALS, the plants, animal, land circles, does something that we don't like in community life, we see has a negative impact from our perspective, then we can bring that to general circle, where our leader and delegate from community life is going to be talking with the leader and delegate of plants, animal, land stewards, and the other leaders and delegates of the other circles. And they can have the discussion there about things that impact beyond their particular circle in ways that, yeah, that we want to clarify, amend, revise, and see where that goes. There's also alternative processes for appeals, um, because the first one is circle based, since sociocracy is so much circle based. But in order to get sociocracy approved by co-housing communities, we've often had to do this particular appeal process, that any four people, no two from the same household, can appeal any decision to the circle that made that decision. So you don't have to convince your own home circle, you can just convince three other people. So this still shifts the power from consensus to at least a small group, that a small group has authority to get into the process. Whereas a single individual, if they can't convince anybody else that something is that meaningful, then they don't have traction. They really can't move forward. So we're trying to, again, that balance that power between individuals and groups. And it's the same process. They can bring their appeal to the circle, and the circle that made the decision can react to that. And if they not happy with that, then they can seek mediation and go on to the next circle, next parent circle above that. There comes an issue where when you get to the board of directors, there's kind of like no circle above that. Or board of directors, same thing as mission circle for us. Or in co-housing communities, sometimes there isn't a board of directors, or that's not the top circle in communities. Sometimes it's the whole community, or in some worker co-ops where the entire membership is the board, is the full circle, the whole community. If you're taking issues from a small group that you can't resolve, it does not make sense to bring them to a larger group, because they're not going to be able to resolve it in a larger group if they can't resolve it in a smaller group. What you can do with a larger group is get feedback. So you get more ideas and then bring those back to the smaller group to make decisions. But this is one of the challenges of consensus decision making in voluntary organizations like co-housing, where you bring a conflict from a small group into the larger group, and what happens there is debate and not really resolution. And you create a task group to try to deal with it, but the task group meets or falls apart or brings back an issue, and there's still another round of debate, and it just doesn't end. So we need an end. So one of the ways to have an end is something we're calling the resolution circle. If a circle is unable to make a decision, usually the parent circle, it moves up to the parent circle to try to resolve it. But the inability to make decisions poses a risk to the well-being of the organization. So creating something like a resolution circle, that's a strategy to ensure that decisions are always possible, even when consent does not seem achievable. So that means the process here is that you convene a group. After there's been reasonable effort to try to resolve it and you can't do it, you convene a group. And I'll say more a bit about that. I think I already said that the key piece of, since the mission circle does not have a parent circle, we need a special mechanism to deal with the possibility that the mission circle is unable to make a decision by consent. I want to say this would rarely happen. In my community, it's happened once. In Sociocracy for All, in our 5 years, it hasn't happened yet. But there's a couple of reasons why sometimes this is important. For example, if you have a co-housing community that adopts sociocracy, a lender like a bank may want to feel assured that the community, that the homeowners association can make a decision, that the board can make a decision. So if they see something like consensus or consent, they'll go, what's that? It's kind of like, take me to your leader. I want to know that somebody's going to make the decision. So having a resolution circle is a process that helps us get there. And I'll say more about how that becomes a legal process. So a resolution circle is a temporary circle with the aim and domain of decision making, not mediating. This is beyond mediation. So resolution circles in practice, in our context, in my co-housing community, it's the community life circle that generates the resolution circle. In Extinction Rebellion, New York City, in which Ted and I participate, it's what's called the regen circle, talking about regenerative regeneration. I don't know how to say that word in English. Um, in Sociocracy for All, it would be our mission circle or our board. So these set in motion the resolution circle, picking people who are acceptable to the parties in conflict and who have those kind of qualities of capacity to listen and capacity to make hard decisions. What's the process of the resolution circle? If you're familiar with sociocracy, you'll notice these words: understand, explore, decide. So understand the context of the issue and the tensions, explore the possibilities for resolution, and come up with a decision and the next steps for carrying it out. There's no appeal. Resolution group decisions are final. And when you get the slide deck, these are links to some of these resolution circle descriptions, which are pretty similar to each other, but slightly different. So what makes, let's see, do I have a missing, just, I had one more. No, okay, so what makes decision-making legal can be sometimes complicated. In the, and this is particularly in the context of voluntary organizations where, I'll keep using my own co-housing community because it's so much the story here. The membership of the community is larger than the people who are homeowners. The homeowners are only the people whose names are on the deeds. And typically, as a condominium, the homeowners would belong to the homeowners association, the HOA, and they meet once a year and make bylaw changes and select the board of directors. The problem is when you're trying to have a sense of community in co-housing, like who the community is larger than the people whose names are on the deeds. For example, Ted lives here and his name is not on any deed. So if you're a simple condominium, Ted would not have any say. But because we intentionally want to include all of our live-in partners, our adult children, or our parents, or our renters, anyone who really wants to be a member of the community can be without being a homeowner. And so then what that means is if you have to make a decision that is typically done by the homeowners association, you want to make that decision first by the committee of the whole. So this is the concept where the whole means all those people who are members of the community can get together in their full circle or whole community meeting, make a decision, which then gets rubber stamped by the homeowners association, by the legal body. And so you meet the letter of the law because it is a decision and it goes in the minutes. And yeah, so committee of the whole, which can serve for both decisions of the homeowners association or for the board of directors. So for any nonprofit or any other kind of organization, you can have a larger group present the larger group, the committee of the whole, comes up with a certain decision, or you can call it a recommendation, and then the board of directors rubber stamps that in what's called the consent agenda. So um, the the board of directors or the homeowners association in this kind of context can have on its agenda what we call an item, the consent agenda, and it could have several different items in it. And the process is very simply, we have this consent agenda item. Any objections to approving it? No objections, consent. So you can do this in 5 minutes. You can approve 10 different policies that are maybe 30 pages long, but they have already been approved, by the full circle of the circles that are in charge of those particular domains. Um, and these are not, most of us are not familiar with these terms, but these terms do appear in Robert's Rules of Order, uh, parliamentary procedure. They have been used. They have been used in several cases. They were used in I think, the original Constitution of the United States, because there were more delegates present. There were more people present than were delegates, and so they made a committee of the whole to come up with a decision, and then they had the consent agenda that only the delegates approved. I think the same thing was done in some way in Canada when there was a kind of apology moment around Indigenous First Nations people. In order to have them in the parliament, they needed to have a committee of the whole in order to circumvent the kind of parliamentary rules that they had. But that's what allowed them to be present, make a joint decision that then got rubber stamped by the actual parliament. And we'll have time for questions and answers if any of these things you want to follow up on. And I think I might have said most of this already. Because there are, again, speaking about condominiums, because that's so much of the place where I've practiced sociocracy, is that there are certain laws that say the homeowners association needs to approve the budget. The homeowners association needs to elect the board members and any bylaws. So these are the processes, these are the places where we carry out this committee of the whole consent agenda. And that's what I just said. There's another kind of fallback. So this is one, is having the consent agenda and the committee of the whole. But what if for some bizarre reason the board does not approve the consent agenda? There's somebody on the board who's just decided they don't really want to play by the consent rules that they had agreed to. So what do you do then? Well, you can also have another fallback in your legal documents that say if the board fails to consent to the proposal in its consent agenda, they will immediately decide by 2/3 majority rule of those present and voting with a quorum of 4. So you can do a fallback to vote. And the same with a full circle or 8 homeowners association failed to consent to the item in the consent agenda, and they can immediately go to a majority rule, super majority rule. So those are ways to just meet the letter of the law and get through the kinds of conflicts that some very, very, very rarely come up. But it is stuff that you want to have in your agreements so that you have some way of exiting from conflict in a positive way.
Jerry, there's one question directly to that. Why a quorum of 4? Why 4?
Oh, this was actually, this was taken from, well, 4 being, I'm assuming that generally board of directors is anywhere from 5 to 12 people, maybe sometimes larger, but what's the minimum size that that is appropriate for your particular group? A group of 3 out of 9 is rather small. So group of 4, it's like, so what's that number for you that makes sense? There's enough different bodies in the room that the decision that they make feels legitimate.